Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and today I've got two special guests. I've got Andee Blacksugar from KMFDM and Blondie. How's it going, Andee? Good to see you.
Very well. Nice to be here.
And also Reed Little from the Contrarians. How are you, Reed?
Doing great, Peter. Thanks for the invite.
Fantastic. We are going to talk about Iggy and the Stooges, a very landmark, important band, and we are going to rank the albums from 5 to 1. So the three albums in the early 70s and also the two reunion albums. Andee, just a quick throw to you. What was the first time you ever heard an Iggy Pop album, a song, the Stooges?
Geez, I don't know if I could really answer when was the first time I heard Iggy Pop or the Stooges, but I will say that I started listening to them in the 2000s. In New York City, if you go to certain kinds of bars, you just hear the Stooges. It's kind of part of the fabric of things. And I actually I was the Saturday night DJ at a dive bar in the East Village called Manitoba's, which is co-owned by Richard Manitoba, Handsome Dick Manitoba of the Dictators. And so, as you can imagine, that was sort of a 70s rock and roll, punk rock kind of themed bar. And as the DJ, I wanted to really, play appropriate music for the venue. And that's when I started buying Stooges albums. And just that kind of pre-punk stuff that I had never really listened to before, things like New York Dolls and MC5 and the Dictators and things like that. So that's kind of when I started really paying attention to the Stooges. I've never been a huge Stooges fan. I always preferred the Iggy solo, like the first few Iggy solo albums. It's just a little more idiosyncratic and unpredictable for me. But I do love a good chunk of the Stooges catalog. I feel like they're a band where you kind of had to be there to understand like how radical it was at the time. And I also feel like these albums were really trying to capture some crazy like live energy that we can debate the degree to which they successfully capture that crazy, because you hear the stories about what they were like live and it sounds like just nuts
Chaos. Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
so it's always been hard to capture those kind of bands in a studio.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll throw it to you, Reed. When was the first time you heard Iggy Pop or the Stooges for that matter?
Wow, it very much comes in fits and starts. I would have first heard the Stooges when I was in college, but it was exclusively the track "I Want to Be Your Dog." That's like, if somebody is a casual Stooges fan, that's the song they know. I don't even think it's one of their better songs. We'll get into that. But I was much more aware of Iggy Pop as an actor because I like B movies, and he was in a lot of really terrible movies at the beginning of the 90s. Like he's in Crow City of Angels. And he's got some other roles where he's basically Iggy Pop in these terrible B movies. And then I got into Iggy's solo catalog because I was such a big Bowie fan. And then I didn't go back to the Stooges. This is a really strange labyrinthine thing, but I became a huge Johnny Marr fan. And Johnny Marr talks up James Williamson constantly. He's always going on about James Williamson. So after that, I went, oh, well, I've got to check out the albums that James Williamson played on. And that was kind of completing the catalog, as it were. So it's been a long process. There wasn't any one time where I sat down and went, I'm just going to get all of the Stooges catalog. It's just kind of happened organically over the last 40 years.
Over time, yeah. Well, for me, I've always been a David Bowie fan, and I think I got onto Iggy Pop through a weird contrarian type of album choice, and that was Blah Blah Blah. I love that album, which is effectively, it's almost like a David Bowie solo album. I saw Iggy do a tour of Australia on the Instinct tour and had Steve Jones in the band. Pretty average album, but great tour. And then I've seen subsequent tours since. I saw Iggy play the Big Day Out in 2006. Big Day Out, for those folks in the Northern Hemisphere, is like a Coachella or Lollapalooza, and you've got all these acts playing. And that was the Stooges being reunited prior to the Weirdness coming out. But over this course of time, explored the Iggy catalogue back forwards, gone into the Stooges, and I groove on it. I really dig it. So, all right. Well, why don't we get into the catalogue and we'll rank it 5 to 1, and we can just have a bit of a yak about each of the albums. So I'll start off with you, Andee. What's your number 5 in ranking Iggy and the Stooges?
Okay. Well, first of all, this was fun for me because I never listened to the reunion albums until this week. So I've got a very fresh take on these. So number 5 is The Weirdness, the first of the reunion albums. I wrote some things down. This is the one that's recorded by Steve Albini. It's got that kind of Albini drum sound. They've got Mike Watt on bass guitar, but the Asheton brothers are there. Some things I wrote down, taken in the context of its time. This is just a very mediocre garage rock album. You know, in the 2000s, it was sort of a revival of garage rock, and there are all these exciting bands. I think the best of which was the White Stripes. And in the context of that environment, this sounds very low effort to me. Iggy's vocals are perfunctory with none of the feral throat-ripping intensity of the old records. That's another point I made. Vocal melodies lazily follow the riffs, but out of tune. Lame album cover. The title track could have been almost great, but it sounds unconvincingly executed. One other weird thing, Free and Freaky, which the chorus goes free and freaky in the USA. Does that not sound like ROCK in the USA? Has anyone else noticed this? Really a weird thing to rip off from a weird place. Anyway, didn't like it. Really I was kind of appalled at the laziness of this album.
Okay, thank you. That's a cracking start. Reed, what's your number 5?
Okay, and I have to apologize. When I closed up the room, I did not realize I had a cat behind the couch. So he's poking claws into my back. So if you see me wincing, that's the reason. All right, so I'm not going to dispute anything Andee said because that's all true. But I actually put Ready to Die as the lowest of the albums, and that's just a bit of my current mindset with the Stooges catalog. You know, add your favorite cliche here. You can't step into the same river twice. You can't go home again. I'm always skeptical when bands reunite after 30 years. In this case, you know, 1973 to 2007 is the distance between albums. If you're talking about a really long time, or Ready to Die was 2013. My God, that was 40 years later. So it's a very interesting process because I don't think that James Williamson has grown much as a musician. Now, he stopped making albums not too long after they did Raw Power. He did Kill City, and he appears a bit on another Iggy Pop album later, I think Soldier. And then he becomes an electrical engineer and just disappears from the music scene for years and years and years. So when they bring him back, it's like James is still the same guy he was in the 1970s. But Iggy's had 40 years of, I don't know if evolution's the right term to put to Iggy, but he's no longer the same guy he was in the 1970s. He's been up, he's been down, he's been every possible direction. And I think his vocals on both of those reunion albums are just terrible. This album, man, I feel like I smoked 3 packs listening to this album. His voice is so rough and gravelly. But what really kills it for me are his lyrics. I think they are the most perfunctory.
Yeah.
They're almost a parody of Iggy Pop lyrics. He's just writing here. This is what I think the Stooges would sound like in 2013, and I think he's way off base. It's just they aren't honest lyrics to me. They're really vulgar, and they don't really have anything to say. But the music behind it might as well have been on Raw Power. It's very much 1973. And certainly I defer to Andy's guitar expertise over mine, but I don't think James Williamson is a particularly advanced guitarist. He's one of those guys who's got a very narrow range of technique, but he's very assured within that range. I think he kind of does what he does very well, but he doesn't do very many things. So you know what you're going to get when you listen to him play. So that's what I think. I think Iggy is phoning it in every possible sense. And the music is fine, but the Iggy performance puts it at the bottom for me.
Okay, thank you, Reed. I'm going to pick the weirdness of 2007. I think the production of Steve Albini is grungy sounding. It's somewhat lo-fi, so that's a bit of a tick. It's trying to go back to that era of the 70s. But my God, some of the lyrics of this album are terrible. There's 12 songs, so I think 12 songs is too much for an Iggy and the Stooges. When you look at those Stooges albums, they usually had about 6, 7, 8, very economical, 30 minutes and you're gone. This has got way too many songs, which is, the CD age. Trollin'. Lyrics are probably the worst of Iggy's career. Rock critics wouldn't like this at all. I guess my faith is riding my balls. Hey, we're trolling. Terrible. You can't have friends. That chorus has an awful pop punk melody that's kind of infiltrated music in the 90s. I never liked that poppy punk. My idea of fun is it's like writing a 70s era Stooges song in 2007, and it just does not sound right. And, there's this ongoing concept of with Iggy about fun. Fun is very relevant and groovy in the late 60s and 70s, but it has a whole different meaning. So it's a little bit grandpa trying to stay relevant. Free and Freaky in the USA. Thank you, Andy. You picked that up. I was just thinking John Cougar Mellencamp. Anything that's in the USA is an instant turn-off for me. It's just a little bit cliched. Gritty, Awful People. This is a definitely old man pointing at the clouds and screaming. They always clap on the wrong beat. They're wearing loafers on their feet. Greedy, awful people. It's like he's just got no ideas in the vault. It's kind of awful. Now, there's a couple of songs I don't mind. ATM has a bit of a I want to be your dog feel about it. It's a bit of a stomp. Some interesting guitar work. And the weirdness has a bit of a slowed down waltz, a bit of a self-reflection lyric, a bit of an outlier, and Iggy's doing the baritone and a bit of a falsetto, depending on what you like. This album, I actually think in this time period that the early Stooges albums sounded fresh and relevant and current, but these albums sounded dated. So it's kind of reverse time zone for me. All in all, I think the weirdness is pretty awful, and it's not the reunion album that everyone deserved. And I'll just recap. My memory of seeing Iggy play The Big Day Out, I found them a little bit twee with all the other acts that were playing at the time. And the only memory I have of seeing Iggy in the Stooges was he invited about 200 of the crowd on stage, and they had a bit of a crowd mosh on stage. Did you ever see Iggy in the day, Andy, around this period, 2006?
Well, it's funny you asked. The only time I saw Iggy Pop, I did a show with him about a year ago in London called Dog Day Afternoon in the Park at Crystal Palace. I actually brought the T-shirt. This is the event shirt. This is pretty fucking cool. It's Iggy Pop, like King Kong in the background, and then Blondie in the foreground. And so I get to be, this is me over here. I get to be on a T-shirt with Iggy Pop. That was the only time I've ever seen him, and he was great. He delivered. He's such a freak. he's this old guy up there with his shirt off, and he's lurching around. He's sort of hobbling with that weird, I don't know, he's got some kind of, I don't know what his ailment is that causes his gait to be so lopsided, but what a crazy guy. Just he does become kind of possessed with some kind of spirit when he gets up there on stage. There's no question about it. And they had a horn section. The band was great. He played all the songs you wanted to hear. I thought he was great when I saw him.
Killer. Yeah, no, he is great live. All right, Andee, we'll put it over to you. What's your number 4?
So Ready to Die is my number 4. And the reason, actually, I was so pleasantly surprised with this album. Because, and this is a spoiler alert, but I think that James Williamson gets better results out of Iggy. I love the Kill City album. There's something about James Williamson's guitar playing. It's true. Read what you said. It's almost like they just, froze him in amber or something and then like cracked him out of mothballs to make this album, because he sounds exactly the same. But I love that. Like he didn't get proficient. So he's got this really like, inelegant, snarling, hard-edged style. But he is more of a songwriter, I think. He kind of gives Iggy more kind of like sensible chunks of organized music to work with. So my notes here, the first song, Burn, he's already getting a lot more focus out of Iggy than we heard on The Weirdness, just because the song structure is more succinct. Sex and Money's got the horns, hand claps, backing vocals, really fun. Iggy multi-tracks his vocals on that, which I think works really well. This album just seems more considered than The Weirdness, less lazy, I think, just as far as just the way everything's put together. Maybe not so much about the lyrics, but Gun has the really half-baked lyrics, but it could have been a really like almost raw power caliber track. Unfriendly World I really liked, kind of a dreamy acoustic thing with really astute structuring. That's the thing about the Ashton brothers version of the Stooges, is just kind of, it just seems like they come up with one idea for the song and that's the song, and Iggy has to just kind of sell the whole thing on his own. So I did like that song. And Departed actually I didn't go look up the lyrics for Departed, but I thought the lyrics, from what I could tell, were kind of poignant. So yeah, I enjoyed Ready to Die. I could even put this album higher. It's just that it's, what year was this? 2013 or something?
2013, yeah. Yes.
So yeah, it stays in the bottom just because it is a band sort of like way past the point where they were radical and they're doing something that they can just kind of do in their sleep. And so like, again, with all the time that has passed and all the things that have happened since the Stooges first came out, this doesn't, it's hard to give it a lot of points for bravery or anything, you know what I mean? So anyway, Ready to Die, that's my number 4.
Yeah, thank you. Reed, what's your number 4?
Well, my contrarian pick for number 4 is The Weirdness. I'm not going off book and going with one of the others. The Weirdness is not a great album, unquestionably. It's just what I've discovered at this particular time in my musical life, and we all change in taste. Things go up, things go down. But right now, it's the chaos of the album that appeals to me. Minus Iggy, because Iggy sucks on this album. His lyrics are terrible. His vocal is terrible. Some of the vocals may be the most lazy vocal performances I've ever heard. But behind that, I think the band is just going absolutely insane. They're not great songwriters, They don't know how to write hooks. They don't know how to do melodies, but they have a couple of songs that are just sheer chaos. And I don't know if that's, the drugs. The band famously had a lot of drug issues all the way from the 70s. I can't imagine those had gotten a lot better over the years. Maybe they had. But something about it. I like the music. I hate Iggy. I think Iggy Pop is the worst thing on those final two records. I think he'd have been so much happier continuing to do his solo albums. And I love a lot of his solo albums that were made in the 21st century, but I don't think he wanted to be the Stooges again, and it really shows on these albums. But the Stooges I thought were great. And I love the chaos and energy of it, even though objectively Ready to Die is probably a better album. But right now, I'm into the weirdness.
Okay, thanks, Reed. Well, my number 4 is Ready to Die. I think this has got a really noisy, cluttered production. I don't like Stooges digital. I like them analog, and I like that 70s sound, that real garagey sound. And the first song, Burn, is really noisy. I like my Stooges primal, and there's not enough primal on this album. Sex and Money, that terrible lyric, nipples come and go. It only comes alive when there's a brief, tasty sax line from Steve McKay, but it's a bit of self-parody. Job, there's a riff there that sounds like Offspring, Pretty Fly. I got a job and I'm sick of it. They don't pay shit. Come on, Iggy, you can do better than that. Gun, that could have been a real interesting social commentary, but it doesn't really go anywhere. Now, some of the songs I like Ready to Die. That has a bit of 70s Stooges call to arms feel to it. But I'm finding that the guitars are mixed up and the vocals are down. I don't mind Iggy's vocals, and I don't mind if he's a little bit out of tune. It all sort of works as a package. The whole thing about Stooges they were perfect imperfect. You don't want Stooges to be digital. You don't want it to be perfect. You want it to be a little bit raw and edgy. So Ready to Die, the guitars have a nice call and response feel to it. DD's has a bit of a Motown stomple groove to it. And Unfriendly World, I love that real intimate baritone, half-spoken, fragile. And it's a bit of a surprise on a Stooges album. Probably belongs on an Iggy album, but I think the album's all better for it being there. So all in all, I agree with Andee. I think this is a much improved effort in 2013. But this is a good period of time after the last album, and I think it was a little bit ho-hum. It's sort of, it got dropped into the record stores, and I don't think it raised a lot of noise. Anyway. Okay, Andee, now we get to the 70s albums. I'll be interested to see how you rank the 3 Stooges albums in the 70s. What's your number 3?
Okay, well, this one might get me some hate in the comments. Funhouse, number 3. Out of the first 3 albums, Funhouse is the one that I think the production is it hurts it. I don't like the murky, cavernous presentation of the band here. I totally love the vibe of the album. It's sort of, from what I understand, they were really inspired by James Brown. They just recorded these vamps and just turned Iggy loose on top. And luckily, Iggy is just frighteningly great. He is just like a feral, howling animal on this record. When I listen to Down on the Street, it kind of makes me think of what Suicide is going to sound like with Alan Vega doing those crazy yips and yelps, and those it's like a crazy guy in the subway kind of sound, like the kind of guy that nobody wants to look at. That's just kind of shouting to himself. Loose has such an unhinged vocal. I think I read an Iggy book, a biography. I don't know if it was authorized or not. I remember reading that he liked to put first of all, we used a handheld mic in the studio. They couldn't make him stand in front of a mic. He had to have like a 58 or something and be able to like do his thing. And I also heard that he, a lot of times they would put it through a guitar amp and like a Fender, I don't know, a Fender Champ or something, and turn it all the way up and mic that and get this like overdriven sound. It sounds like that to me on this record and some of these early albums. It just sounds like they turned him loose in the studio. TBI has that hypnotic motoric beat. The desperate trudge of dirt. It just has like this, I don't know. It has a desperate, like a kind of urban ennui to it. Funhouse. I love how he says "bring it down" a couple of times, and they don't bring it down. The band doesn't do it. That's like, if you're gonna do a James Brown thing, you gotta listen to the band should be listening to the singer. And then LA Blues is just like this freeform noise jam, which is cool. I like Funhouse, but I like the immediacy of the debut and just the in-your-faceness of it a little bit more, which I'll get to later. But yeah, Funhouse is great. It's my number 3.
Okay, thank you very much. Reed, what's your number 3?
Okay, my number 3, and again, probably a contrarian opinion, but I'm going with the debut, the Stooges. It is my least favorite of the early albums. I think I've talked about this in concept with some other bands. A narrative gets attached to bands, and then people analyze the band through the narrative rather than listening to the band for what it is. So the narrative of Iggy Pop is that they are proto-punk. That's the term that everybody applies to Iggy Pop. It actually is arguably accurate for an album we'll get to later, but the first album, there is nothing punk about it. It's a straight up psychedelic rock album. I listen to it and I'm like, these guys want to be Jimi Hendrix. They're Jimi Hendrix with different lyrics. It could have been, the Strawberry Alarm Clock. I mean, it's just a 60s psych album played with less raw talent and a lot more psychotic energy. And I like that. But you listen to some of the songs like No Fun. That's just it's a pop song. It's not punk. Now, it sounds fine. I like the way it sounds. And I enjoy the album. But I will always put it lowest of the 3 albums because I freaking hate We Will Fall. It's 10 minutes of hippie, dippy, trippy bullshit they're just like chanting. There's no music to it. And if they had done that for like 30 seconds, fine, it would have been a laugh. 2 minutes would way have worn out its welcome. 10 minutes and 18 seconds is an intentional assault on the listener. They're daring you to hate this album, and I do. I hate that song. I never want to listen to it again. Now that I've listened to this album so many times in preparation for the show, I will never listen to it again. I'm deleting it from my music player so that I don't have to accidentally hear it. It's the worst thing that the Stooges ever put on any form of recording. But other than that, I think the album's great. It's so proto of the Stooges. They didn't have an identity yet. They were very much putting out, like I say, a more aggressive psychedelic rock, but they hadn't become the Stooges.
All right, Reed, I'll have a cup of tea and a lie down after that one. Raw Power, controversial, number 3 for me. I love the first 3, but I was basing it on the original production. I'm not going to include the remix, mastered versions, the original version. I think it's wonderful, but I just like the first two a little bit better. I mean, Search and Destroy, that's just a masterpiece. Charged up garage rock, verse, chorus, it hits you in waves. And that is the definite Iggy person coming out in spades. Gimme Danger, he's got his Jim Morrison going on. Iggy was very Jim Morrison. He had his Jim Morrison going on, you know. You could imagine him doing the swoon in the studio. All that sexuality coming out. I mean, his phrasing swoops up and down, really unusual compared to the rest of Iggy's work in Gimme Danger. And then halfway it kicks in with a yelp, and you can hear the sound of all these young teenagers plugging in their guitars and being influenced. Quick reference to proto-punk. I never heard that term. I've been going to a lot of gigs. I follow Radio Birdman from the 80s because we always used to call it the Detroit rock sound. So this whole terminology of proto-punk is really kind of recent. And I do tend to agree with you, Reed. I think it's a kind of a modern terminology to how do we classify these bands like MC5? I don't know. I don't know if I subscribe to the terminology proto-punk, but that could be a topic for another show. Getting back to here, raw power, grinding rhythmic energy. This crystallizes Detroit, Iggy or sinewy abs bearing it all, and I Need Somebody. I can hear a bit of Bowie influence in this one. It's slow, dark, bluesy, brooding, sexually charged. So I love this album, but I just don't quite like it as much as the first two, which I just think really define primal, simple rock and roll. So number 3 for me is Raw Power. Over to you, Andee. What do you think about proto-punk, this terminology? It's only recent for me. Have you always heard this term like for the last 10 years, 20 years? I don't know.
I think so because Brits and Americans are constantly arguing over who invented punk. So then it gets into this. Well, we had the Stooges. Oh, well, we had Dr. Feelgood or whatever the Brits are, putting out there. Yeah, I've heard the term. I think Martin just did a podcast called "There Is No Proto-Punk." He says that none of this music is he kind of saying what you just said. Punk doesn't happen until punk, and all this stuff before it is just something else. But if you're going to talk about the Stooges as being proto-punk, you have to talk about garage rock in general. You have to talk about the Sonics. You have to talk about the Who,
the Trashmen. You could go back to a lot of those old, Louie Louie. That could be like a punk song. It goes back to how you've got to draw a line at some point. It just goes too far. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting listening to this stuff because I hear it. So I'm just going to segue into my number 2, which is the debut. The Stooges, psychedelic rock album. Yeah, I hear it as more of a garage rock album because it's actually quite dry, very visceral, a lot of hand claps and wah-wah. Yeah. There is so little musical protein in this stuff. I mean, it is just barbaric musicianship and barely riffs. It is absolutely about the swagger. It's about all the intangible things, the danger, the feeling that you're listening to like borderline criminals. That's kind of what jumps out to me. And I really get it more strongly on this album than Raw Power, not Raw Power, Funhouse, because it's so in your face and it's so dry and antagonistic. There are a couple pairs of songs on here that I think are really similar to each. So like you've got 1969 and No Fun, which are both kind of these odes to urban ennui and just kind of aimlessness and boredom and nihilism. And then you've got this other pair, which is Real Cool Time and Not Right, which are so tossed off and just so like almost nothing. But there's a spontaneity and a visceralness to them that just it's the swagger that sells the thing. There's no great riffs here. There's no great melodies. It just sounds like miscreants that were just recorded. I like We Will Fall, actually. I think that's kind of a lysergic, culty kind of meditation on doom. And I do like how Iggy goes into his lower Morrison-esque range on that one. What else is on there? Anne kind of has a Stooges-y mix, or a Funhouse-y mix, where it's more reverby, and it's kind of back to front, like the drums and bass are right up in the front, and the vocals and the guitar are way in the back and reverbed out. Yeah, it's funny. Like the ideas on this album are some of them are so slight. Well, I didn't even mention I Want to Be Your Dog. I don't have the faintest idea what that's about. I mean, it's some kind of a strange, unique, romantic proclamation, I guess. I think people love it because of the line, I want to be your dog. I think that's why so many people cover it. They love singing that. It has almost like there's something self-flagellating about that, or it does have a kind of like postmodern punkish sentiment just in that line, but I still don't really know what it means. And it's got that riff that like any beginner guitar player can play, and it's not much of a riff. I actually played that song at a party about a year ago with Paul Cook on drums. That was kind of fun. So it's one of those tunes that all the punk bands knew how to play. They all it's sort of like common language, and I'm not sure why. It's sort of just it's as good, or it measures up to anything else on this album. I don't think it's particularly standout, but yeah, this album is about swagger. It's about a really dry capturing of like really unhinged, schooled musicians just kind of venting their frustration. So that's it. That's my number 2.
Yeah, well said, well said. And I think it's probably one of those albums that they were just basically making their own rules, weren't they? Because there was nobody that sounded like the Stooges. Well, maybe there were, but we don't know about them. But they were just sort of making stuff up as they went along. Reed, what's your next?
All right. Oh, and just to kind of piggyback on what Andee was saying, because I was going to talk a little bit about I Want to Be Your Dog, and then I forgot. I think what gives that song, to me, what gives it the lasting power is that it is so different than any of the other tracks on the album. But I don't think it actually provides the way forward for the Stooges as a musician, as a musical outfit. I don't think the songs that they did on the next 2 albums were like that, which is very interesting. But Iggy Pop, if you go into The Idiot or Lust for Life, there are some songs on there that are very kind of derived from that much slower tempo. Something like Night Clubbing might be a direct outgrowth of something like I Want to Be Your Dog. And yeah, you really can't overlook the idea of it's so simple, and everybody that wants to play, punk rock learns that song. It's like everybody learning You Really Got Me by the Kinks, or everybody learning Louie Louie or these other. It was like you say, part of the common language of those bands. Anyway, I love we're all going to have different top 3s, which is great. My number 2 is Raw Power. And I have to say, prior to, again, preparing for this show, Raw Power would have been my unquestioned number 1. I think it's objectively a better album than Funhouse. I think James Williamson is objectively a better songwriter than the Asheton brothers. And he really gets the peak performance out of Iggy. But is it possible for an album to be too professional? I don't know. I can't kind of not talk about this and Funhouse at the same time, but I love almost everything about it except the production. The original production by David Bowie, it's got a fascinating story. Bowie says he was hired kind of at the last minute to rescue this album, and what they brought him was 2 tracks. Everything in the studio had been bounced down to 2 tracks, so he had nothing to mix. James Williamson absolutely rejects that. He says that's not true. So who knows? It sounded bad. And then when Iggy redid it, which was the version you could get on CD, so that's the version that I owned, and he redlined everything, so everything that comes out of your headphones or your speakers is distorted, and it sounds terrible. And he was trying to pass that off as, oh, it's raw power. That's how it's supposed to sound. And I'm like, I bet he just had no idea what he was doing, and he just turned all the faders up. And really, I find it very hard to listen to that version of it. At least you can get the Bowie mix again now digitally. But it's great songs. Some of Iggy's best lyrics. I remember Rollins. Henry Rollins always talks about, the opening line, I'm a street walking cheetah with a heart full of napalm. It's in a way you think, man, that's really juvenile, but you add the swagger in that Andee's talking about. No one could sell that line like Iggy Pop selling that line up on stage with his shirt off and possibly having cut himself a few times and, jumping down into the audience to fight people and whatever. It was a dangerous band, and that's a dangerous start to that song. Although I think my favorite on the album is probably Your Pretty Face Is Going to Hell. I also really like Gimme Danger, which is a little bit of a slower song. And I think that's where you really see James Williamson's chops as a songwriter is in the slower material, because that's when the musicality of it really comes through. And I know after all of that, it's going to be hard for me to sell Funhouse as my number 1 pick, but we'll talk about that. It's not necessarily a rational choice.
Well, we'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it, collect your thoughts. I'm sure you'll come up with something. Hey, guys, these albums sold stuff all in the day. I think they barely charted. Do you reckon they've gone to at least platinum certification or gold over time? What do you reckon, Andee?
I don't know anything about the sales.
Yeah. I mean, even the Ramones, their greatest hits struggled and eventually got to, gold certification. But I mean, for a band, this is an influential band. Let's face it. They have inspired so many garage bands, indie bands, Detroit rock sounding bands, at least my observation in Australia in the gig scene. You would think that there's been a fair few copies of the first 2 or the first 3 albums that have been sold, but in the day, barely get arrested. And it was on a major label. Wouldn't happen these days, or in the period where people gave it time. Elektra.
Yeah.
They would allow them to find their way and pick up an audience, but not now. All right. My next pick is Funhouse. Not much difference between my 1 and 2. It's probably a decimal point. So many great songs. This is a classic album. Down on the Street. I love the groove on this song. It's got a really grimy, menacing feel to it. And Iggy sings with so much assurance, confidence. I love his yelping and hollering. And it's got this wonderful payoff with these power chords. It's all primal music. It's not intricate. It's all guitar chords. But God, it's primal. It's in your face, and I love it. And sometimes the simplicity can be genius. And I think there's a lot of genius in these albums because it's so simple, but so catchy and so effective. TVI, this is a real primal rave-up stomp. It's again, genius in its simplicity. I love how Iggy really loses control towards the end of this one. He goes absolutely bananas. And then, just before the reprise. 1970. This is probably my favorite of the album. Andee, The Damned, GBH. What punk band hasn't covered this one. It's like a proto-punk anthem. It captures young adult angst. It's raw, hedonistic. Out of my mind on a Saturday night. Love it. Funhouse, I love that jazzy sax. I love it where the sax goes really wild and Coltrane-like, or tries to be like Coltrane, and you've got the guitar lines interweaving, licking in, trade-offs. And LA Blues, it's noisy. They just go bonkers. I don't mind it. It's their Revolution 9. So Funhouse for me, number 2, but it is very short distance between my 1 and 2. So Andee, I think I know what your number 1 is. Hit me with it. Go for it.
Yeah, it's the one with the best album cover. Interesting how whenever he's working with James Williamson, it becomes Iggy and the Stooges. It was the same thing with the Ready to Die. It was back to Iggy and the Stooges. I'm not sure why that is. Anyway, this is the Iggy remix, by the way, and I actually kind of like it. I like it. It's all redlined. I love that the whatever it is, the glockenspiel or whatever in what's this? See if I can remember this. You know that. That line that the mallet plays is so loud in this remix, and just like these things that he, you know, that
Andee,
chord right there.
Your phone is killing the sound coming from your guitar. I can't hear it at all.
Okay, so my point being, James Williamson comes up with riffs and arpeggios that Iggy just wraps himself around. The guitar sound is strafing. It's like trebly. It just kind of it leaps out of the speakers and it just tears your face off. I like the more compact song structures. You know, I like the variation where you have the acoustic in Give Me Danger, and you get, you know, the, Pretty Faces Going to Hell is kind of like a more menacing New York Dolls. And again, it sounds like it's got this spontaneity of, it sounds like Iggy's got a handheld mic and his levels are dipping in and out. It sounds really it sounds very live. You know, Penetration is sort of like a fun housey track because it's very repetitive, but that's the one with the glockenspiel. Love that track. I just love those extra touches, the glockenspiel and the acoustic, and just a little bit more sonic ornamentation than you get on Funhouse. Shake Appeal, kind of like the first album. It's got that slithery swagger, very unhinged, mental guitar soloing in it. Just he's got such an untutored, just unapologetic, like violent take on his guitar playing. And I just think that it brings the best out of Iggy. I love his lyrics. I love his vocal performance on this is just, it's so antagonistic. And, this is the album, I think, that more than any that we should be able to call proto-punk, because it's just the sheer provocation of it is really the thing that makes it punk in my book. So that's it. Sorry, my audio cut out, but those riffs, James Williamson's guitar riffs are pretty clever on this record. And I love, again, I'm going to say again, I love Kill City. For what just the extra songcraft that he gets out of Iggy with his musical foundations.
Thank you very much. Well done, Andee. Reed, what's your number one?
Couple of preliminaries before I go on to Funhouse. I do think you're fundamentally right, Andee. The Stooges are two different bands. The Ashetons, you get the Stooges, and James Williamson, it's Iggy and the Stooges. The story there being they had no intention of that first album being a Stooges album. They were in London and recording. They couldn't find other musicians, so they invited the Ashetons to join. Depending on whose account of it you read, either they didn't want to and he thought that playing bass was a big downgrade, but James Williamson says that there was no intention of that being a Stooges album, and that came out after the fact. And then they made it Iggy and the Stooges, kind of like, Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi for a seventh star. So that is an interesting thing. But yes, proto-punk. I tried to find this book. I read a book about punk from somebody who worked in the music press in the 1970s in the UK, and he said that there is very specifically a concert from Iggy and the Stooges in like 1974 that had about 50 people in the audience, but those 50 people happened to include members of the Sex Pistols and the Damned and the Stranglers and these other bands that became punk went to see Iggy and the Stooges, and James Williamson is the foundation of the punk guitar sound. Now, I tried to find, I've got books all over the house. I couldn't find that book because I wanted to be able to give somebody credit for that or blame if people don't agree with it. But this guy makes, in contrast to Martin, who says there was no proto-punk, this guy said that absolutely Iggy and the Stooges were the proto-punk because they literally took their sound and attitude from Iggy and the Stooges. Now, that having been said, like I said, anytime prior to this exercise, I would have put Raw Power as my number one. But I really found myself drawn to Funhouse. And again, it's the chaos of it. With the Ashetons, they just are not the kind of songwriting, like, polished professionals, to use an inadequate term, that James Williamson is. They've really stopped, though, trying to be Jimi Hendrix. You get a lot more Doors influence on Funhouse. There's one song, I always forget which one. I think it's Dirt. The opening of it could not sound more like a Doors track. You just listen to it and go, yeah, you know what they had been listening to. TVI is the kind of the song that has kept on through whatever public consciousness you can apply to the Stooges. And I think it's a fantastic song. It's energetic, and I say, Iggy yipping and yowling like an animal. And I think it's more memorable than I Want to Be Your Dog. It's a little bit more complicated. It's not as slow. It's so much more energetic and punky. But I think Funhouse is the album where they stopped being, a garage band that was just aping what they heard and didn't really have a direction yet. I think Funhouse was their direction. I think that is the album where you say, this is the Stooges. It's this album. And then when you get to Iggy and the Stooges, you have a completely separate kind of thing that they become. So really two different entities. And right now, I think Funhouse is, although I hate to use the term, I think it's fun. I listen to it a lot. I like the sonics on it. I actually can't compare the lyric, even though I normally pay a lot of attention to the lyrics. Most of the time, I have no idea what the lyrics in these songs are. He's yelling. He's hard to understand. I do get, she's got a TV eye on you. I think that's a line that has actually moved into other people's songwriting. And it's a wonderful album. So I do think Raw Power's the proto-punk album. Funhouse, there was nothing else like it. It was just what it was. And clearly that wasn't what people wanted in 1970 because the album went absolutely nowhere commercially.
Thanks, Reed. Well, isn't it funny when you read these stories about bands that only play to 50 people, but all these other children of bands and bands get created out of that audience? It's kind of got a bit of a mythological feel about it. My favorite album is the debut. I love it simply because it's primitive, it's raw, it's grungy, it's direct. And I think it's where it all started. So I just love it to bits. You know, I love the 1969. It's a simple primal song. It's a time capsule of young male angst, controlled aggression vocally, and you've got the guitars with the wah-wah coming in and giving proceedings a bit of edge, a bit of unease. I Want to Be Your Dog. I think Iggy's getting quite lusty. That's my interpretation, Andee. I think it's all about sex, submission. I don't know, somewhere. It's got a driving beat, and I love the John Cale on the sleigh bells. You know, that hammer. It's like the anvil, you know, coming down, and you've got this fuzzy guitars in this downward scale. It's musically, it's very primitive, but it's so effective. We Will Fall. Message to you, Reed. I don't mind it. I think it's hypnotic. It gets you in. It's haunting. It's psychedelic. You know, just let it flow. Let it wash over you. It's not Metal Machine music, but at the same time, there's something I don't mind about it. Maybe I'm contrarian. No Fun. Again, this song inspired so many garage bands. Garage rock at its coolest. And Iggy riffing. Real cool time. Listen to the Keith Moon-like feels on the song when wah-wah's not enough. We're not talking about Scott Ashton's drumming. He was a pretty good drummer. There's some really tasty fills on this album. I think he's very underrated. Little Doll, this plays tribute to the jazz maestro Pharoah Sanders on Little Doll, copying a bass line from Little Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt. So Ashton brings his Hendrix on this one. All in all, I just think the songs found pound for pound are a little bit stronger than the second and third. And for me, this is an album where they just, you know, they set the template and they ran with it. So there we go. Well, gentlemen, Andee, do you want to have a final wrap-up words about Iggy and the Stooges? And I'll throw it over to Reed.
I don't know. I think I've said everything. Yeah, it's funny, these albums that are so influential, they are rarely big sellers, you know. Often they're not big sellers. What do you call it? Velvet Underground, same story. I remember reading it was probably in like 2014. It was something like, the Ramones' first album finally goes gold today in 2014, you know. Right. Meanwhile, there's like billions of t-shirts out there. Yeah, it's interesting. It's hard to describe what this is because obviously you kind of had to be there. The concerts were the stuff of legend. It's hard to know what their intentions were, what they were trying to be. Maybe they were trying to be like a Jimi Hendrix experience or more of a psych rock band. And of course, nobody has any control really over what people are going to do with the inspiration that you give them. And if it becomes punk, and then suddenly you're now part of the punk story, there's not much you can do to control that. I feel like, you know, so there's a thing that I call accidental genius. And I think there's a lot of that going on here. It's very, very like barbarian, like caveman musicianship that carries with it a certain kind of statement. You know, that is a statement in a way. And those are the things that make punk bands come out of the soil. You know, it's just like the inspiration of, I could do that, you know, and I like that it sounds really rude and unpolished. So yeah, really interesting, interesting band. The whole story with the you know, the remix of Raw Power and all that, and the reunion. I agree that, you know, when a band reunites so many years after the fact, it just, you know, I tried to get into the Black Sabbath 13 album, and that just did nothing for me. It really felt like they were just trying, like they kind of had a template there, and they colored very carefully inside the lines of, you know, 1970, and it was just kind of, we don't need this, you know.
Yeah,
um,
too shiny, not grimy enough, that album, I don't think.
yeah, anyway, that's all I have to say about it.
Reed, any final words on the Stooges?
No real coherent thoughts. I think a lot about things like inspiration, and I love, Andy, what you said about you can't control what people take from your inspiration, right? And there are so many things to be inspired by with a band like the Stooges. You know, Henry Rollins is inspired by the attitude in the lyrics. You know, a bunch of bedroom guitarists are inspired by the fact that they can play I want to be your dog. And, you know, maybe they can't sit down and play, you know, like Hendrix, The Wind Cries Mary. They can't figure out that, but they can play I want to be your dog on it. And there's something I think very inspiring to me about people that have less musical bandwidth available to them, and yet they take that and they create art. I think that's really cool. It's a thing that I've never had a talent for. I am a guitar player. I enjoy playing guitar, but I'm not a songwriter, so I just play other people's music. And I'm like, man, I wish I was more creative. So when I hear creative people, I think it's very inspiring. And the Stooges definitely made the most out of the abilities that they had. And Iggy Pop certainly never stopped, although also, as Andee has alluded to over and over again, the best of Iggy always comes with collaboration from other musicians. David Bowie got great stuff out of Iggy, and James Williamson got great stuff out of Iggy. I don't know that the Ashetons got the best stuff out of Iggy, but it's a hell of a lot of fun, and the catalog is very much worth enjoying. If you don't like punk rock, if you've been put off by this whole proto-punk thing, ignore it. Just give the catalog a listen.
Thank you, Reed. Well, all I've got to say is the Stooges, they've created some of the, in my opinion, the greatest rock albums. It's primal, it's raw, and, you know, basically they were just starting out and created a whole sort of genre of rock, maybe. But Andee Blacksugar, wonderful to have you. We're going to get you back on the show. Great chatting with you. Reed Little, as always, on the Contrarians. Folks, please tell us what you think of the Iggy and the Stooges. What are your favorite albums? Maybe favorite Iggy album? We love reading your comments. But one thing's for sure, there'll be more shows on Rock Daydream Nation coming very soon. Good night and cheers.